Well, hello there, fellow COVID refugees, and welcome again to Drinking Alone with Friends, the show in which I drink alone and wish you were here. As we continue to work our way through regarding cocktails, today's recipe is the JFK Harris, which, fun trivia of the day, is named after an obscure poet and friend of the bartender who invented it. It's essentially a riff on a mojito, so what I'm going to throw in here is about 10 to 12 fresh mint leaves. And then you can see that we're using a lemon and not a lime. The recipe calls for 3/4 ounce of fresh lemon juice. So essentially this is a mojito, but we sub lemon for lime, and then what you see on the far left there, it seems out of place, it's actually a bottle of red wine. And so this is essentially a mojito with lemon, and we're going to put a red wine float at the end. So that's 3/4 ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice and 3/4 ounce of homemade simple syrup. That's going to go into our mixing tin. Now, interestingly enough, red wine floats are actually a Prohibition-era classic, and they used to call it a red wine snap or a claret snap. Claret was one of the brands of red wine that would be commonly put on top of cocktails. And it's not used all that much, though there is a fairly famous and probably the most notorious drink with a red wine float. It's called the New York Whiskey Sour, which is not named after it being popular from New York, but just the name of the drink. Now we're adding 2 ounces of rum, and this is a 4-year Florida Cognac rum. But going back to that story, a New York whiskey sour is essentially just a whiskey sour that then has a red wine float on top. And it makes it a really interesting drink because it adds a little bit of fruitiness, a little bit of complexity, and then sort of this dryness that dries out what is otherwise a fairly sweet and simple cocktail. And I'm curious to see what it does in this mixture. So just to recap, a classic sour build, 3/4 of lemon, 3/4 of simple, and 2 of Florida Cognac 4-year rum. We're going to shake that up with a single cube, and then a cube is going into a whiskey glass. I'm going to double strain this, especially because you can see a little bit of mint floating on top there, and I don't want any particulate matter in the cocktail. And we're going to see what we get. And then the recipe does not specify, but when you look at recipes for like wine snaps in general or for New York sours, they typically recommend a fairly fruity and fairly dry wine. I am just using the wine that I have had because I opened the bottle yesterday for dinner. So this is what we're using. But if you were going to do something like a Shiraz or a Malbec, if you were getting a wine to purpose, would be what would be recommended for this drink. And I'm just going to take a bar spoon, lay it in there, and then pour very delicately on top for a float, and we'll see that go in. Now I think the contrast in this is beautiful, and I'm curious to see what it delivers on the flavor front. Well, cheers, friends. So the cocktail still very much tastes fresh, minty, complex, and has a little more depth from that wine. I'm curious what it'll be like to mix it all together. But overall, I wonder, is it time for the claret snap to make a revival? And that is really excellent. I think one of my favorites from the book. So until next time, friends,